Mustafa Alio. I'm the co-managing director for Our Seat. You hear it as an Our Seat, but actually it stands for Refugees Seeking Equal Access at the Table. Let's say more of an initiative, not really an organization where we think of ourselves more of a tool that we work with collective stakeholders and targeting mainly government and states on how to create mechanisms and processes where they consult with refugees on policies and commitments that affect their life.
My name is Rez Gardi, and I'm the other co-managing director for Our Seat.
Our main goal, which is not really refugee participation, but rather is enhancing and improving the global response system through the participation of refugees.
Move the needle from talking about what is meaningful refugee participation, how do we influence policies, how do we get engagement, to actually working on practical, sustainable models. So it's driven a large amount of our work.
By living in different camps, by facing different challenges, these all policy we are still working on. I become like recipients of those policies, and I think that's the main spark which I had and still have, which forced me to work what I am doing today. So yeah, and since then, from 2016, I'm working on how we can bring systematic change in the policy. So everyone was talking about for refugees, but no one talking with refugees, and their lived experience become like data. Their experience being represented by other actors instead of them. That's why we started for meaningful participation, which I will talk more further in our talk. But I think what we are doing is about our lived experience and how we can transfer our knowledges when we are talking about it, and even the understanding of when we are talking about meaningful participation, partnership, representation, why it is important in research. To highlight that, yes.
Wir haben unterschiedliche Aufgaben in diesem Projekt. Also Trade Refugees Deutschland hat so kleine Projekte. Zum Beispiel erste ist die Beratung und die Verweisung von geflüchteten LSBTI-Menschen, Lesben, Schwulen, Bisexuellen, Trans, Inter, queer, asexuelle, also unterschiedliche sexuelle und geschlechtliche Vielfalt haben sie. Dann die zweite Aufgabe ist die Sensibilisierung Workshops von Personal in Asylunterkünften. Darüber hinaus, es gibt eine letzte Aufgabe im Projekt, und das war, dass wir die LSBTI-geflüchtete Aktivisten und Aktivistinnen eine Plattform gegeben haben, wo sie ihre Stimme aufheben können für ihre eigenen Rechte, weil wir reden über Geflüchteten sehr viel, aber wir reden manchmal mit den Geflüchteten gar nicht. Und das war ein Anliegen, ein persönliches Anliegen auch. Wenn man über mich redet, dann sollte man auch mit mir reden.
We've been contacted by a lot of research bodies, and I think that happens regularly, where we're asked if there is a chance to have a talk about what we're doing internationally and globally. I think the area of refugee inclusion and participation and improving the global response system through partnership with refugees is an emerging norm, something that we wrote recently for the Refugee Survey Quarterly for Oxford, and then definitely even before that, there's continuous conversation with academic body on what's the best to do that. I think one of the other topics that we keep getting a lot of requests, not only from academic party, but also from different parties in terms of how to engage with refugees in the best way possible, and how to create a consultative bodies with them. And Riz and I, we've been very careful, because we feel also that sometimes with a growing momentum on something, and then everyone wanted to do it, it doesn't mean that everyone is doing it right. it becomes more kind of as a trend more than anything else. We're trying as much as possible to avoid that. And this also comes sometimes even from academia, where it's just that I want to create a body or process that it shows that I am connected with refugees, but just for the sake of showing that I'm connected with refugees, that would raise their profile, will get them closer to funding, possibly.
Also es ist so, dass das ist doch aufwendig von Zeit her, aber zum Beispiel wir können so in den nächsten 15 Tagen oder in den nächsten 21 Tagen oder 4 Wochen oder 5 Wochen uns treffen für 2-3 Stunden und dann kann ich alle Fragen oder meine Kollegen alle Fragen antworten. Also so machen wir das ab. Und das hilft die Leute. Ich sehe, wenn die Forschungen auch veröffentlicht werden, dass es gibt jetzt eine Basis, worauf die anderen Menschen ihre Forschung weitermachen können. Also man muss irgendwie irgendwo anfangen.
What is currently happening, even with a lot of research bodies and academics that genuinely want to engage with refugees, is that it's happening at a stage that's too late for it to be meaningful engagement. So the research ideas, perhaps the first draft proposal, questions, all those things have already been designed, that it's just then getting the perspective of refugees. And then in that scenario, that's where they become the subjects of the research, not an active partner or lead in it. So what we would recommend is that even that design process, before you even think about what angle or shape the research is going to take, what is the point of it, going really early back at that first initial design stage, thinking about what is the point of this, what are we hoping to achieve, bringing refugees in at that stage. And then in that way, even perhaps the research question or the way that it's guided, the angle that it's taking is coming from a perspective that is in line with realities on the ground and the experiences of refugees, and that it's not just this passive responding to questions or consultations, but actually they've helped to shape what the research looks like and what the needs are. I mean, I think from a high level, maybe research bodies and academics can understand what's missing in the literature and what kind of research hasn't really been addressed. But what about from the ground? What research would help the lives of those directly impacted by forced displacement?
2017 und 2018, es kamen nicht so viele Anfragen, weil das Projekt war auch nicht sichtbar. Viele Leute wussten davon auch nicht. Aber 2019, 20, 21 und jetzt 22, wir wurden von vielen Forscherinnen angefragt, ob wir sie bei deren Forschung unterstützen können.
Their new discussion has been emerged, and we are bringing the research element, especially refugee study centers from Oxford. They are also aware, and even this FFVT project, where I am feeling proud of being part as a fellow. We are talking about transformation. And this transformation actually is very important to realize. It's not about only refugees talking about, or scholars is talking about, expert is talking about in the gaps, in the different bubble, but how we can connect, listen to each other and understand. Because as a research, sometimes we use in our academic research, especially, so much difficult, complicated terms, different jargons, and it's difficult for refugees who are very simple, very, in their lives, their terms are different. So how we can connect them and understand, we are saying maybe same thing, but how we can write it down, how we can document.
To start thinking of them as a equal partners. To start, for example, moving from the topic of, we keep hearing about that they need capacity building research on capacity building for refugees, but then what about capacity recognition? What about the strengthening of those capacities? What about recognizing the role in that sense? You should always consider the refugees or people that you intend to research on how to benefit from this. So kind of for your research to have a multiple impact, not only a one-purpose research, which again, I think most of them, in my opinion, so I don't know if that's kind of, it's a one purpose. It's either for graduation, it's either for a certain topic that's been asked or contracted on in a way. But then how can we always think of not only the, let's say what we call it, kind of the business language for it is like, not only to think of the main product, but also to think of the byproduct of this, and then how can when like different people benefit from.
Ich bin sehr großer Fan von Fragen und ich sage auch in meinen Vorträgen und in meinen Sensibilisierungen, Workshops, dass keine Frage ist dumm.
Ja.
Frage ist einfach eine Frage. Stellt die Frage, darauf gibt es entweder eine Antwort oder vielleicht im Moment keine Antwort, aber wir müssen dann diese Antwort finden.
I think by and large, academia is still a very privileged, society. It's very difficult for people to access researchers and academics in the first instance, and then on top of that, the barriers that are faced by people from the global south in protracted refugee situations with limited resources and all the other vulnerabilities that add to that. So I think it's we hear people from the Western world having difficulties accessing the rights to be involved in the academic world, because it is a very prestigious, very privileged, and very, I think, elite group. And so imagine just how difficult it is for people from refugee backgrounds to access these spaces. So I think that access is one of the issues, that it is really this elite society that's very difficult to penetrate, even when refugees come from very strong academic backgrounds, have got the skills and education to be engaged. It's very difficult, I think, for them to be engaged in these spaces. So that's firstly one of, I think, the main barriers to the reach, is that there aren't people from refugee backgrounds in a lot of these spaces. I think that if we look internationally, we can probably count on one hand the number of really well-known academics who have forced displacement background. There are lots of researchers perhaps at a more junior level or emerging academics, but I think that if we look at currently the main authors, the main researchers, the main academics around the globe, very few will really be from a forced displacement background. And that's an issue, because we're not getting the right perspectives in these spaces, and we're relying on people who have the power in these spaces to reach refugee communities. And often there is that, I think, gap between understanding of how best to do that.
Even I'm understanding as a researcher how we are using and even have our own neutral position, because when you are in the research, it's one of the ethical point. You shouldn't be dominant your own perspective when you are doing research. So we are also experiencing that, how to make a new neutral, but it's helping us to translate the research response which we are receiving from displacement community. When they are described, we don't need to has more difficulties understanding their experience, because we know what they are meaning, and we are helping to convey this knowledge through our experience to them, and they shouldn't be remain as a data. And we are trying to convey this message as it is, but we are learning from our academic partner how we can understand what has been done before.
Wenn man das Thema Flucht und Migration forscht, dann muss man zwei Sachen auf jeden Fall denken. Warum fliehen die Menschen? Was steckt dahinter? Weil alle sind auch nicht auf einmal wirtschaftliche Geflüchtete. Also, das ist ein sehr großes Thema. Und Flucht ist nicht von gestern entstanden. Menschen sind immer geflohen. Sie werden auch immer weiterhin fliehen. Es gibt immer unterschiedliche Gründe, warum die Menschen fliehen. Und die nächste ist, wohin fliehen Sie und dann warum fliehen Sie dahin?
Mhm.
Also, die beiden Sachen sind sehr, sehr wichtig und alles dazwischen, das kann man forschen.
We don't have currently a lot of researchers in this space. So what we really need to be doing is creating scholarship identified by people who are currently displaced and bringing them into this work. And so this requires a prioritization and orientation towards co-designing, co-researching, co-leading that can provide a platform for scholars with displacement experiences. And there's a responsibility on the academic community. So whether they're leading or emerging scholars, they need to be facilitating research and academic training in this space and scholarship opportunities that can result in very specific deliverables and very genuine and effective participation and involvement of refugees in this academic work. Let's train and bring in more refugees with a research background to be part of the academic community.
I really want, as a researcher, to do how we count knowledge. What is knowledge? To be considered in research methods. Like if I say, if I'm sharing something as a non-academic methods, but it's become remains as a normal blog, it will not consider as a good journal article. So how we can come up and think about, maybe I don't have expertise or skills or means, to produce that academic research journal. So how we can see this is still a very valid knowledgeable article. So how we can consider that. We really need to understand how we can serving them also, and these kind of reports, I'm not saying the podcast or blog will not help them, but I'm saying we make sure it's reached to them. Then how we can make sure, maybe we can have a follow-up meeting, already put design in the project when we are designing the project as a follow-up when we have dissemination part. So we will see what kind of dissemination method would they like, they and different languages. So English is like in German context, I know it's being German language, in Netherlands in Dutch, but still we need to understand the language being used in these communities.
We know that when you write an academic scholarly piece, that there's only going to be a certain number of people who read it. And so that's a conscious decision. What purpose you're writing it? Further to Mustafa's point, often it is to contribute to literature, and we know it's being read by certain people. And is that the aim ultimately, or do we want to have further reach? And so I think the format and the way it's presented is also important. Translating perhaps some of these really scholarly pieces into more impact kind of papers, policy briefs that would then help guide both RLOs or governments or other actors, depending on what the point or target of the research is. But it needs to have a number of different formats that is accessible by people who have, I think, different forms of understanding. So it's not just about the academic level, but also the field that they work in. So sometimes we know that overly scholarly articles are interesting from an academic perspective, but the theoretical applications don't necessarily translate well into more practical situations. It could even just be direct conversation, like researchers having better relationships with communities to be able to present the work that they're doing and how it applies in that context. So I think it's really about being creative and innovative and stepping outside of our academic and scholarship networks and frame of thinking, and going beyond that, challenging ourselves to make it more applicable and accessible.
And the thing is that even you are involving refugee and you are not able to pay refugees researchers to pay as such, we should need to give them a proper reference, proper insight, not only to say, okay, one refugee from Kampala 40 years old said that, but no, proper that, and share the outcomes with them. afterwards, when you conduct the research, everything happens. I think that's so somehow there's a lack of resharing after the outcomes. So we collect the data, we go do the interviews, we do the focus group discussion, but we never, maybe they are, but we need to practice this more and more. When we have developed the report, outcomes, research papers, policy brief, we should go back to the communities and inform them, okay, this is a policy brief we have come up, or recommendation we come up. What do you think now about this, and how you want to be involved in the future, so we can generate more meaningful partnership, or as a follow-up research is being missing. Yeah.
In der Zukunft, ich glaube, alles wird digital sein. Also alles wird sehr bald digital sein, und Podcast wäre eine neue Art und eine neue Form von Hörsaal. Also das ist eine neue Hörsaal, das wir digital geschafft haben. Es kann sein, dass viele Professorinnen in der Zukunft nur Podcast machen. Das ist eine Sache, das erwarte ich auch sehr viel von Akademikerinnen, dass nicht so schwerwiegende Begriffe benutzt werden. Einfache Sprache, das macht mehr Sinn.
As much as I hear it so much coming from academia, that we're just the academic with no power and just kind of thoughts, it's not true. I think academia has a tremendous power. This is where policymakers go to make their own decisions and to make life-changing decisions or life-destroying decisions.
Create more research reports, blogs, and more studies about women experience as a for the first migration.
Ich glaube, Forschung soll in der Zukunft sehr intersektional sein. Und wenn wir das erreichen, dann machen wir vielleicht ein besseres Leben von geflüchteten Menschen. Sexuelle und geschlechtliche Vielfalt, das muss man berücksichtigen, weil das zeigt auch vieles und zeigt auch die Bedürfnisse von Geflüchteten und Migranten in Ankunftsländern. Wie sieht es denn aus? Oder auch von Herkunftsländern, warum diese Gruppe oder diese bestimmte Gruppe eigentlich flieht. Und ich habe in meisten Recherche und Forschungen gesehen, dass das wird nicht beobachtet und auch nicht berücksichtigt.
Showing the world what does it mean when we invest, for example, in policies that include those people and then support those people rather than just kind of a policy that exclude them. And I think it's a huge base that academia need to utilize and use in a way to support the people on the ground through their knowledge sharing, through their intention of benefiting, again, just not only to think of the main product of their research, but also to think of the byproduct and the people they're researching.
I will request, from all the people who will be attending, different actors, different agencies, different scholars, how we can co-design, co-work, co-plan working with the communities. So it's vice versa. So we share our lived experience as a knowledge, as I said earlier, to the scholars, but how scholar also, incorporate more with the refugees, upcoming researchers as a mentors, as a working together, as a publishing more and more articles with the authors from the refugee background. I think I would highly suggest how we can, and also how we can come up with the more opportunities for as a fellows. Fellowships as a more not only master degrees, because there are so many master degrees, but when it's come to scholarship for the PhD or the post PhD or a senior level of position, how we can open this kind of scholarship.
perhaps the next time, say, an academic or a researcher has a particular topic in mind, I urge them to just stop and think and consider whether this particular topic will be more powerful if it's written by a refugee or if it's co-written by a refugee rather than them being the author of it. And I think that takes something quite intentional, because it's natural for academics, with the amount of work and research and contributions they make to their academic fields, to want to get credit for particular work. But I think it's just taking that step back and thinking, is it going to be more powerful if this is something that, as a non-refugee or a person with no lived experience of forced displacement, that you're writing about this topic and having refugees as part of your consultation and then writing about them? Or is this something that they should contribute directly to the scholarship through?
Only focus on vulnerabilities, but also resilience of the communities for the forced migration. And we shouldn't talk about them as a beneficiary of data, but how we can highlight, create a visibility of their struggles.
Je nach Forscher auch, weil einige Forscher sind auch dann eher besser in Schreiben, anderen in also sprechen, noch anderen können auch vor Kamera eine sehr gute Video machen. Also ich würde sagen, go for it. Do everything you want to do.